What up, Wizards? It's Dev and Digby and the chicken. She just jumped on off the couch. She doesn't like when I record stuff. Half my family's here to talk about some Outlaws of Thunder Junction Spurlers. Felt like there hadn't been enough wordplay this season. Wizards have been doing most of the work for me, to be honest, so figured I'd throw you a bone. Anyway, lots of cards. Another 50 freaking cards. You'd think that eventually it would like slow down a little bit, but no, it's like 50 cards a day, so we have a lot to look at. We have a lot to look at. There's a mat in your fur, buddy. Jeez, you all right? Anyway, cowboy cards. Commons first. As usual, timestamp joke, running gag this season. Either way, we got to look at the commons first, as usual. And I got a few to race through before we get to some actual good cards today. But it's important to know about draft stuff. I will contend and maintain, as I've been doing for 8 years here on the channel. Let's look at the draft stuff first. Let's look at Inventive Wingsmith along with Oasis Gardener and Sterling Keykeeper. Now, Inventive Wingsmith is 3 mana. It's 2 and a white for a 2/4 Dwarf Artificer. At the beginning of your end step, if you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn, and Wingsmith doesn't have a flying counter on it, guess what? Put a flying counter on it. So yeah, he gets to make a little pair of wings fly around with, but only the one time because it wouldn't make sense to do it more than once. Either way, obviously works with plot. It's kind of cool. Starts at the 3 mana 2/4. It's not a bad stat line. So giving it flying's nice. Not for standard. Again, these are draft cards. Oasis Gardener is cool. I was hoping we get some Scarecrow support in the Cowboy set. Here we go. 3 mana for a 2/2 artifact creature, which is a Scarecrow. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life, and you can tap it for a mana of any color. This is actually not like the worst 3 mana rock in the entire world. I'll take 2 life. That's doing something the turn I play my 3 mana rock. Most rocks don't do that. Also, probably the most notable thing about this card is it kind of reminds me of the artwork from the Scary Stories to Tell in the Darks books from when I was like 7 years old. So that's not, I mean, it's kind of a good memory, but it's also kind of a very off-putting memory. So let's move to Sterling Keykeeper here. This is 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 2/2 human mercenary. You can pay 2 and tap it to tap a non-mount creature. Can't tap horses for some reason, but I guess you can't cage a horse, man, but still. Flavor-wise, it's kind of weird flavor. You can, in fact, cage a horse. You shouldn't, but you could. Either way, I don't know why I'm stuck on that. This is just a tapper. It's a tapper in limited. We've seen a few of those already in this set. There seem to be an abundance of tappers in this thing, but this guy costs 2 mana to do that, which is kind of a lot when you really get down to it. Let's push it on over to Wanted Griffin, Peerless Rope Master, and Spring Splasher here. Now, Wanted Griffin is 4 mana, 3 and a white for 3/2 Griffin with flying, because Griffins fly. When it dies, you get one of them 1/1 guys. Them 1/1 mercenaries, what are in this set. Totally normal Magic card. It's just Snapping Drake with the upside of giving you a 1/1. So better than Snapping Drake in limited. That would have been relevant in like 2007, but I'm not sure that it still is. Still, you get a 4 mana 3-power flyer in limited that actually gives you something when it dies, and it's going to. Now, Rope Master over here is 5 mana, 4 and a blue for a 4/4 human rogue. When he enters the battlefield, you can return up to 1 target tapped creature to its owner's hand. So you're committing a crime, I guess, if you're targeting your opponent's guys. I guess you could target your guys. There's always that. But a 5 mana 4/4 is at least an okay stat line in limited. And when it comes attached to like a mana war, sure. Especially in a format where you get paid off for targeting people's stuff. So yeah, I guess he's okay. He kind of reminds me of me when I was 12. I had all the yo-yos. I was trying to be in the yo-yo world championships. But still, not a great card. Let's move on to Spring Splash here. 2 mana, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 frog beast. Whenever it attacks, target creature defending player controls gets -3/-0 till end of turn. That's actually kind of neat. Always happy to see some frog support in standard. We actually have a card in Simic right now in standard that pays off frogs. So like, I guess if you're looking for a 2-drop for your standard frog typal deck, like, here you go, buddy. But other than that, there's really not that much noteworthy about it. So why don't we hop along? Works on 2 levels. Wizards doesn't do all the work for me. Let's look at Rooftop Assassin and Outlaw's Fury next. Now, Assassin is 4 mana. It's 3 and a black for a 2/2 Vampire Assassin with flash and flying and lifelink. And when it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls that was dealt damage this turn. Pretty sneaky considering it has flash. You can do it either after your combat step or after your opponent's combat steps. That kind of matters a good bit. Just block with a little dude you don't care about or whatever, chump block, and suddenly you get this guy and you get to blow something up. It actually seems like a pretty big gain in limited, especially considering you get a flying body attached to your removal spell. Let's kind of go a little bit. Also, lifelink good. Let's move on to Outlaw's Fury here. 3 mana, 2 and a red for an instant. Creatures you control get +2/+0 till end of turn. If you control an outlaw, exile the top card of your library until the next turn. You may play that card. Burn bright with upside, Twitch chat. We're fitting play this card in the Outlaws deck. Maybe. Look, I've been looking at Outlaws last couple of nights on Scryfall, like what we already have in the format. And I'm not actually super sure that we have a great Outlaws deck, even with all the new cards from this set. Hoping to put out a little video this weekend, maybe a coffee break or something, about like what all Outlaws are in Standard, what are the best Outlaws, yada yada. But for the time being, I'm not sure that there's really like a super low to the ground Outlaws build. You could try, but if you did, this is probably a card you'd play as like a pseudo finisher, and if it doesn't finish the game, it gets you some card draw. So I'm always a big fan of a Burn Bright. That's why I've been talking about this card way too long. But up next, we got to look at There's a Snake in My Boot. It's actually not. It's a different thing Woody says when you pull his string, though. It's Reach for the Sky, along with Mystical Tether and Voracious Varmint. Now, Reach for the Sky is for, I can't believe I just pulled off saying that normally. Reach for the Sky is 4 mana, 3 and a green for an enchantment, which is an aura, and has flash and enchants a creature. Enchanted creature gets +3/+2 and has reach. When Reach for the Sky is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. Flash, you get to draw a card. Mitigates some of the things about being an aura. It's 4 mana. 4 mana is too much for this. I'm sorry. A Mystical Tether here is 5 mana, 2 and a white for an enchantment that you can cast as though it had flash if you pay 2 more to cast it. When it enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls until Mystical Tether leaves the battlefield. I want this to be good, but we have this little card in Standard called Leyline of Binding that can hit any permanent and is this, but also costs 1 mana and also has flash already. So I'm not sure. I just, it's probably not great. Any other day, I might be like, hey, flash, a little Oblivion Ring, but no, it's not good. You'll play it in limited. It's a removal spell there. Now, Voracious Varmint, on the other hand, this is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 Varmint with Vigilance. You can pay 1 and sacrifice it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. So back in my day, we had a card in Standard right now in 2024 called Cankerbloom that doesn't see enough play. It's probably just better than this. I guess they gave this like a cool keyword ability or whatever. I just want this to be good. It's, again, probably pretty good in limited, but at this point, I've seen too many Utabi Orangutan, Reclamation Sage, Cankerblooms. There's a million guys like this to still be impressed by them in 2024. So it's good. This card will always be good every time they print it. Let me just put it that way. But, it exists. A whole lot of them have at this point. Let's look at Failed Fording up next, along with Explosive Derailment and Rodeo Pyromasters. These are my 3 favorite commons of the day. Now, Failed Fording gets a lot of points from me just for being an Oregon Trail reference, like right down to the flavor text. This is just a straight up Oregon Trail video game reference. Anyway, which I love about it. It's 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an instant. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If you control the desert, surveil 1. Little bounce, Can hit anything, not just creatures. Sometimes surveils. It's no Fading Hope or anything, but it's a decent tempo piece. And I'm always going to rank these somewhat highly, even if they don't end up seeing Standard play, because they're typically strong cards. But just like the last card we looked at, it's how many unsummon or bounce spells with upside can you print at this point? It's never super exciting, but it still does look like a solid spell. Explosive Derailment looks alright though. This is a red mana for an instant with Spree. You can pay an extra 2 to have Explosive Derailment do 4 damage to a creature. You can also pay an extra 2 to have it destroy an artifact. So it's going to cost a little bit more than a Shatter, and it's going to cost a little bit more than the usual spell that would just kill a creature in red, especially one that doesn't kill Shelly, right? So 3 mana to use either one of these modes by themselves, but of course you can also 2-for-1 your opponent for 5 mana, which is kind of nice, I think, some of the time, even in Standard. I'm not sure that it's going to see too much play there, but at the same time, I just really like the versatility on Spree, and I tend to highly rank these cards too, because I like modality and I like versatility. Also like when cards are cool, so let's look at Rodeo Pyromancers next. This is 4 mana, 3 and a red for a 3/4 Human Mercenary. Whenever you cast your first spell each turn, add 2 red. Awesome. Super cool. A fixed version of all of the cards that do stuff like this. Most notably Emissary, right? But when it doesn't just pay you back the mana that you spent to cast it in the first place, it doesn't look quite as impressive. But still, getting a couple of mana back when you play this is kind of awesome. And in Limited, at least, you can use that to like plot stuff and still do something on your turn. Like play a relatively big guy, right? And still have a little extra mana left. Or you can play him and play a removal spell. There's just all kinds of stuff you can use this extra mana on. So I'm always going to be into a creature that pays you back some mana like on ETB. And of course, there's always blinking him and stuff like that, because once he's in play and you blink him, he can effectively just give you free mana at that point. So really cool guy right here. Not sure that he's destined to see too much standard play, but I'm interested in how Pauper players feel about him. He's probably a little bit too slow for that format, but just about anything blinkable that gives you free mana is something that you're probably going to look at. Now, moving into the uncommons here, let's take a look at Nurturing Pixie, Raucous Entertainer, and Bounding Felidar. Now, Pixie is a single white mana for a 1/1 fairy rogue with flying. When it ETBs, return up to one target non-fairy, non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. If a permanent was returned this way, then Pixie gets a +1/+1 counter. So a little 1 mana 2/2 flyer, but you got to pop something back to your hand, which shouldn't be too hard to figure out, even if you're just playing like Blue-White Skies and you get your Spyglass Siren back in your hand to get another map token. Like that could be annoying, but probably not good enough. Either way, I do kind of like this thing if you have some desirable and cheap, repeatable ETB triggers, right? So aside from that, though, it's not going to be too impressive a lot of the time. Raucous Entertainer's 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 Plant Bard. It's the Plant Bard from Morrow's Teaser. You can pay 1 and tap it, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control that entered the battlefield this turn. Might be really cool in like Commander Tokens decks or something like that, where you create a billion tokens in a turn. It could be cute. Also, answering my question, what instrument is he playing? A piano. I guess that makes plenty of sense in an Old West theme. Bounding Felidar over here is 6 mana, 5 and a white for a 4/7 funky PT there. Cat Beast Mount. We sure are riding a lot of cats in this set. When Bounding Felidar attacks while saddled, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control, and you gain 1 life for each one of those creatures. Why not? And it saddles for 2. Really weird card here. Super odd. It just makes your whole team big. So that's okay. Doesn't matter if the team saddled it or not. The whole team gets big. And you also gain a little bit of life because you tap some guys down. And so maybe you don't want to die on crackback. Maybe something like that. So this is probably not great. Let me just throw that out there. I don't know how amazing this is, but maybe in stalematey games of Limited where you're attacking with a 4-power dude that's actually kind of hard to kill on blocks because of the high toughness, and the rest of your team's getting big over the course of like 2-3 turns, like maybe it helps you win some of those like wars of attrition, but so I'm not too sure about it all around. So let's move on to Omen Port Vigilante, as well as Gila Courser and Betrayal at the Vault. Now, Omen Port Vigilante is 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 2/2 human mercenary. Omen Port Vigilante has double strike as long as you've committed a crime this turn. That's the whole card. Pretty easy to commit crimes, right? So you just kind of have a 2 mana 2/2 double strike. Usually 2 mana double strikes are 1/1, Steph. Oh my God, it makes this card pretty good, but you do have to kind of work for it just a little bit. And I think by all accounts, Illuminator Virtuoso will do more cool things for you in standard, but like maybe this is your copies 5 through 8 of Illuminator Virtuoso in case you don't get it in your opening hand. But either way, I don't see too many great things on the horizon for it in standard, but in Limited, this is actually a super not embarrassing creature to play as a 2-drop. But Gila Courser over here is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 4/2 Lizard Mount. Whenever it attacks while saddled, you exile the top card of your library till the end of your next turn. You may play that card, and it saddles for just 1. A lot of 3 mana 4/2s in this set. This is the 3rd or 4th one that I can remember off the top of my head. Pretty specific stat lines that continue to occur over and over, but either way, cool little dude here. He doesn't saddle for too much, and he's going to help you effectively draw extra cards until the end of your next turn. Is a long time to be able to play a card. There's also a ton of stuff in this set, at least in Limited, that cares about like your creatures being power 4 or greater, so he slots into those decks pretty nicely too. But really, I just like this card because it makes me think of King of the Hill, and anything that makes me think of King of the Hill I like, because at one point Lucky and Hank are discussing an Old West detective show, and Hank says, "That was a good show. I remember there was one episode where the murder weapon was a Gila monster." So it makes me think of this card. It also kind of makes me think of MKM, little King of the Hill tie-in from MKM to Thunder Junction. Anyway, should we move on? I think we probably should. At this point, I'm just talking nonsense. So let's look at Betrayal at the Vault next. This is 6 mana For an instant, 6 mana, 4 and 2 green for an instant. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each of 2 other target creatures. So, hey, okay, like instant speed bite effect that takes out 2 guys, but it is 6 mana. That is just too much. So let's keep it pushing full steam ahead to a card named Full Steam Ahead, as well as Trash the Town and Boombox over here. We're starting to get slightly better. Full Steam Ahead is the overrun effect for limited in this set, and it's pretty good this time around. 5 mana, 3 and 2 green for a sorcery. Until end of turn, each creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains trample, and this creature can't be blocked by more than 1 creature, effectively making any menace dudes you have unblockable. And there's a fair number of menace guys in the set already, so that's kind of fun. But still, just an overrun effect that also gives trample and also makes your dudes harder to actually take down. Like, absolutely. This is just a pure green good effect. Usually, we see like weird values stamped onto these in the last couple of sets, but this is just, again, purely good. Nothing but good stuff. I like that. Sometimes simplicity is the best way to go. This card does that, and it impresses me. So let's move on to Trash the Town here. A single green mana for an instant with Spree. +2 mana, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. +1 mana, target creature gains trample till end of turn. And +1 mana, until end of turn, target creature gains, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw 2 cards. Okay, for only 2 mana you get that effect. That's actually kind of sweet. At instant speed in green, you effectively just get 2 cards for 2 mana. That's a Chart a Course. This is Chart a Course in green. That's actually kind of sick. Like, when you think about it, it's not too hard to get it to effectively just be Chart a Course, especially with trample creatures and stuff. You're going to do some combat damage most of the time. So I just like that mode on this card, but obviously you can make a creature a little bit bigger. You can give a creature trample to make sure, again, that it gets in for that combat damage. So it's going to cost you a good amount of mana to do that, but if it's later in the game, you might as well. At least pay the extra couple of mana to give a dude +2/+2 or counters, right? But either way, just like a potential 2 mana to draw 2 cards is something green does not often have access to. So that's actually pretty powerful. And then Boombox over here. I'm actually genuinely impressed with this card. It's 2 mana for an artifact. You can pay 6, tap it, and sack it to destroy up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, and up to 1 target land. Okay. I think this is actually commander playable. I really do. People play like Meteor Golem in that format sometimes. They used to. I don't know about now, but still, like, there are Spine of Ishtar and stuff like that is like somewhat playable in that format. So again, this is 6 mana in your artifact deck the turn that you play it to take 3 things off the table. And like, especially in Commander, being able to remove a land might be really important. In Standard, removing a land might be really important. This goes into my like oops all colorless decks that I build like just about every season anyway. So kind of excited for it there, but just in straight up artifact builds like Thousand Moon Smithy or like Mightstone and Weakstone, trying to get to a Portal to Phyrexia, those builds, like everyone's done these, right? It's not just me. This actually looks like a pretty decent piece of removal. This kills a creature. It's awesome. It didn't have to kill a creature. Also, you can just activate it whenever you want, so long as you have the mana. It's not restricted to sorcery speed. That's kind of nice. Blowing up a land's good in Standard. Again, back to that. Mirrex, creature lands, even random duels and stuff. Like, I don't know. I'm like way too excited about this card. It is a fun reference. And it's weird because it's kind of like a 90s reference, but it's in the Old West set. What are you trying to say? Either way, a sweet card that we'll probably not see any play in Standard ever. But again, I get to like cool design. It's like my favorite thing about Magic, and this is definitely cool design, but it definitely also has some real gameplay function. This is a good card. Whew, we got to move on though. Let's look at Prairie Dog along with Doc Arlock, Grizzled Genius, and Hollow Marauder. Now, Prairie Dog is 2 mana. It's 1 and a white for a 2/2 squirrel with lifelink. At the beginning of your end step, if you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Prairie Dog. For 5 mana, that's 4 and a white. Until end of turn, if you would put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, put that many +1/+1 counters on it instead. So you have 5 mana, you get a Hardened Scales till end of turn, basically. So that's kind of neat on your 2-drop in like a random draft environment. This is yet another 2 mana 2/2 lifelink. I think it's like the 2nd or 3rd one we've seen in the format at a lower rarity. That's interesting. I've already said that this seems like a pretty slow low environment. I said this on stream the other night. Doesn't seem like aggro has much of a foothold in the limited environment, if I can tell. And honestly, all these low-cost lifelinkers at a low rarity make me kind of think that too. So there's that, but this is just a sweet card. You know, if you're not doing too much of anything, what if this is the only win con in your control deck? let's do that on stream, Twitch chat. Let's go strictly squad. We're going to play this on like turn 4 with counter magic to back it up. And then it's just going to get bigger every single turn until we have a 12-12 lifelink and they just die. That's what we do with it. But either way, I mean, sweet card to begin with. The 2-mana 2/2 lifelink is kind of embarrassing. You don't want to play it in your standard deck, but a 3/3, a 4/4, a 5/5 lifelink, one that puts all the counters on all of your dudes if you have extra mana. Like, now we're starting to talk a little bit, so I kind of don't hate this dude, and I got some designs on doing stuff with him, but he's probably just kind of bad. That said, Squirrel, again, getting us ready for Bloomburrow, and I have no problem with that. Squirrels are always welcome. But let's go ahead and move on to the good doctor, and I do mean good, man. This is a fantastic looking magic card. Doc Arlock, Grizzled Genius, is 2 mana, a green and a blue for a 2/3 legendary bear druid. Spells you cast from your graveyard or exile cost 2 less to cast. Plotting cards from your hand cost 2 less. Huge. Just that last line of text is kind of a massive deal because it costs too much to plot like 9 out of 10 cards with plot. So I guess in your Simic or blue-green X deck, then suddenly it costs you way less to plot your stuff starting on turn 2. And that's awesome. But he also works with adventures and all kinds of other stuff too. So, you know, mess around, see what you can do. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. The guy's kind of amazing. You can flash back stuff for less. He just works with like a bunch of different mechanics. Jumpstart, even like moving along to Commander. These aren't even things that are in standard. Works with Jumpstart. He works with so much. Foretell or whatever. So I don't know, man. This guy probably has a lot of stuff to do in Commander at the very least. But in Standard, I think that this is actually a really cheap way to sort of get started with your plot deck early in the game and, you know, set up some like actual monster plays. So I like this dude. But Hollow Marauder over here is one of the newer cards of the day. 7 mana, 6 and a black for a 4/2. There's that stat line again. Spectre Rogue that cost 1 less to cast for each creature in your graveyard. It has flying, and when it enters the battlefield, any number of target opponents each discard a card. For each of those opponents who didn't discard a card with mana value 4 or greater, draw a card. This is actually kind of very sick. Like, in certain decks, like the Stick Fingers decks or whatever, I was going to say Insidious Roots, but mostly the deck that keeps its graveyard full of creatures and not the one that, you know, systematically removes creatures from his graveyard over and over. So let's just say like the Stick Fingers, like Cruel Somnophage deck that I've been talking about over and over. That thing has 6 creatures in its graveyard by like turn 2 or 3. This could cost you 1 mana very easily, and suddenly your opponent discards a card, and like 9 times out of 10 you draw a card. And that's actually kind of nice, especially considering you also get this 4/2 flying body if that wasn't a good enough deal for you. So yeah. Evasive body with decent power, opponent discards, I draw, and like this could feasibly cast 2 or 3 mana and still be well worth casting. So, and I think, look, 3 mana, that's 3 guys in your yard, right? That's 4 guys in your yard. 7, 6, 5, 4. Yeah, it's 4 guys. 4 guys in your yard to cast it for 3 mana. And again, I think that's very reasonable in certain decks that are full of creatures and full of cards that mill you, so yourself. So again, man, I might be getting a little too excited about it, but that is a very good enter the battlefield trigger, is all I'm saying. Just a couple more slides of uncommons, but we're getting into the really good stuff now. So let's take a look at Ferocification, Cactus Folk Sure Shot, and Map the Frontier. Now, Ferocification is 3 mana, 2 and a red for an enchantment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose 1. Target creature you control gets +2/+0 till end of turn, or target creature you control gains menace and haste until end of turn. I don't have as much to say about this as I did the last couple of cards. I don't think it's quite as good, but at the same time, this is a nice little spread of things to be able to do every single turn. So I kind of don't hate this. I'm not sure that it's quite commander playable or anything, but again, just giving a dude you control haste every turn for the rest of the game starting at 3 mana, and if you don't need to give a guy haste, it doesn't have to do that, you know. That seems good. It reminds me of Rhythm of the Wild. It's a good card. It's a very good card. This doesn't give like all your dudes haste or anything, but giving a guy like Reckless Stormseeker that's harder to kill and can also give a dude +2/+0 every turn if you don't have to give the haste. Again, like, nice. It's actually pretty nice. And Menace too, just thrown in there. Like, Again, I think I've made this clear. Don't hate this card. Now, Cactus Folk Sure Shot is far too high on this list, but I just like this dude, man. He's 4 mana, 2 a red and a green for a 4/4 plant mercenary with reach, and he looks like a guy I'd want to get to know. He just looks like a fun guy. He also has Ward 2, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, other creatures you control with power 4 or greater gain trample and haste until end of turn. Yikes. So this guy's going to give all your big dudes haste for like the rest of the game if he comes down and you untap with him, and you're more likely to untap with him. This is a 4 mana, 4/4 with 2 keyword abilities, one of which keeps him alive. That's actually very, very sick. The other keyword ability allows him to block an Archangel of Wrath and live. So that's kind of neat too in your Gruul deck, right? So, but yeah, trample and haste, trample and haste, trample and haste. Those are 2 amazing abilities in a deck full of huge dudes. So again, I kind of think this guy isn't necessarily sleepery, but he's definitely better than I've seen a lot of people say today, because I haven't seen anybody say anything about him today. And that's weird. He actually seems like he's pretty good based on like keyword abilities and mana cost and power toughness, that nexus of things. I think we call it rate. He's good on rate alone in a lot of ways, but he even does something the turn he comes into play, like gives all your big dudes trample the turn you play him. Like, again, come on. It's pretty good. Now, Map the Frontier here is 4 mana, 3 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic lands and or desert cards. Put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So, okay. Amazing. Like, every time we see a new invasion of Zendikar, I think it was, which was really a new explosive vegetation, which honestly Migration Path was the new explosive vegetation before we see these cards a lot. There's usually these days some gravy stapled on them to make them a little better than explosive vegetation originally was, but they're always decent. Right now Invasion of Zendikar, like one of these cards sees play in a very, very popular standard deck, Domain Ramp. So wouldn't be surprised to see this see play in deserts is all I'm saying, especially considering being able to go and get 2 dual lands or whatever is way better than going getting 2 basics most of the time. But final slide of uncommons here. Let's take a look at Deep Mck Desperado along with Blood Hustler and Bucolic Ranch. Now, Deep Mck Desperado is not a great Magic card, but it is a Hominid, so it's all the way up on my list. It best uncommon of the day as far as I'm concerned. 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 2/4 Hominid mercenary, and whenever you commit a crime, each opponent mills 3 cards. This ability, thankfully to most people, I think, triggers only once each turn. If it triggered more than once each turn, people would be rightfully upset, I think. It's just like having Hedron Crab and Ruin Crab sort of nightmare flashbacks and stuff like that. So this does cost 3 mana though. That's a reasonable amount of mana. It's not 1 mana anymore to get an effect like this. And it's not as easy as playing a land. You actually have to like have cards in your hands that do a specific thing. So I wouldn't go too crazy about this card's existence, but again, Hominid. I just love Hominids. Always a big fan of those. And honestly, I'll take a little bit of mill. I will take a little bit of mill. That said, kind of do wish it could hit me and not just my opponent, but let's move on to Blood Hustler here. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 1/1 vampire rogue. Whenever you commit a crime, put a +1/+1 counter on Blood Hustler, but of course, this ability triggers only once each turn. You can also pay 3 and a black to have target opponent lose 1 life and you gain 1 life. So, a couple of things about this that put it all the way up here in this category. Not too hard, first of all, to make this a 2/2 and then a 3/3 and maybe even a 4/4. Committing crimes is something you're going to be doing in your black deck a good bit, right? Because you got duress, you got many creature removal spells that you're playing. You might have Graveyard Trespasser. I've brought that card up enough times. So there's a lot of ways, right, to target your opponent or their graveyard or their stuff or whatever. So, could be actually halfway decent as a 2-drop in those decks. And of course, later on in the game, if you got nothing else to do, you can just commit a crime by targeting your opponent with this thing's activated ability. But that's what I want to point out the most, is that this thing has an activated ability that if you have infinite mana, could just win you the game. And guess what? There's a deck in Standard that cares about activated abilities and generates infinite mana. The sort of blue-green X Agatha Saul Cauldron, or Saul Cauldron? Better call Saul Cauldron. The Agatha's Soul Cauldron deck in Standard right now tends to try to generate infinite mana, and it needs something to do with it to win the game. And so this could be a fun way of doing it, while also committing crimes, because you might be digging around with Soul Cauldron in your opponent's graveyard too, and that's committing a crime. So I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. Anytime I see an activated ability that actually matters, I'm going to bring up Soul Cauldron, because just giving all your creatures this ability is kind of interesting in and of itself. But I think Bucolic Ranch is my favorite uncommon of the day. This is a land which is a desert, does not come into play tapped. You can tap it the turn you play it, and it taps for a colorless mana. You can also tap to add a mana of any color, but you can spend that only to cast a mount spell. You can pay 3 and tap this to look at the top card of your library. If it's a mount card, you may reveal it, put it in your hand. If you don't put it in your hand, you can put it on the bottom of your library. A lot of cool stuff about this for the mount deck, man. I mean, it's pretty specific to the mount deck, but it is also kind of worth noting that it's a desert that doesn't come into play tapped. And I think desert decks might actually just play some of those if given the chance. But aside from that, I like anytime I see like an Animal Sanctuary or a card like that, right? So it's just cool to have this. I like that it's kind of card draw. It's kind of mana fixing for the mount deck. If you want to play 5 color mounts, let's give it a shot. So I don't know. I just like that a card like this exists. So you've conquered the commons, unlocked the uncommons, and now you're raring to go. Good job. You finally get to see some good cards, right? Well, not so fast, mister or misses. There's always going to be some kind of not great rares. That's just how it is. And sometimes we don't mind so long as those rares call back the cards that we already like. So with that in mind, let's take a look at Archmage's Newt along with a Brushwag. Oh my goodness, a Brushwag. That's right, it's Ornery Tumblewag this time around. But let's take a look at the Newt first. I got better. This is 2 mana. No, that will make no sense if you don't know what I'm talking about. But I think this is a Magic the Gathering audience. You know what reference I just made. 2 mana, 1 and a blue for a 2/2 Salamander Mount. It saddles for 3 for some reason. When it deals combat damage to a player, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback till end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. That card, however, gains flashback 0 until end of turn if Archmage Newt is saddled. Has to get in for combat damage and has no natural evasion or even death touch. Bad card, but another Crapcaster Mage. We keep getting, just reprint Snapcaster Mage. It'll be just good enough for Standard these days, I promise. But still, this is a fun looking card. It's a Newt. I think we can all get down with that. And sometimes, very occasionally, when it's wearing a cryptic coat and you flip it over because it got unblocked, now you get to play a spell for free. I guess in Christmas land, that is what you get to do with it. Now, Ornery Tumblewag over here is 3 mana, 2 and a green for a 2/2 Brushwag Mount. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Whenever Ornery Tumblewag attacks while saddled, double the number of +1/+1 counters on target creature. And this saddles for just 2. So a relatively cheap saddle cost, but what I'm most interested about on this card is the fact that it's Luminarch Aspirant. It's a 3 mana Luminarch Aspirant, which is probably a little bit too slow. We have like fight rigging in Standard, and this is kind of not as good as a fight rigging. So it also doesn't do something incredibly cool once you actually make the thing happen like fight rigging does. So I don't think this card is like too great, but in your +1/+1 counters deck, like maybe you'll give it a shot. Oh, but hold your horses, everybody. We got a Breaches sighting over here. Breaches, the Blastmaster, along with Rush of Dread on this same slide, sure. Breaches, the Blastmaster is 3 mana, 1 a blue and a red for a 3/3 legendary goblin pirate with menace. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you may sacrifice an artifact. If you do, flip a coin. When you win the flip, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. If you lose the flip, Breaches the Blastmaster deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to any target. Gotcha, you thought it was going to be bad to lose the flip. No, it's actually, no matter what happens with the flip, it's good. The problem is, facilitating the flip is harder than it seems. Not only do you have to cast 2 spells, but you have to have an artifact to sacrifice once you've gotten through that first hurdle. 2 hurdles to flip a coin. So I'm not a huge fan of this particular Breaches. I do like copying spells, so that's kind of fun. And I also like dealing damage equal to my spells casting costs and stuff, but I like it when it's a little bit more predictable and a little bit easier to actually trigger. So I'm not trying to poop on this card too much. It's probably going to be a lot of fun for a lot of people, and it might even be a great commander, but just in terms of Standard viability, I don't think this is one of them. Sure. So let's take a look at Rush of Dread here. 3 mana, 1 and 2 black for a sorcery with Spree. For +1, target opponent sacrifices half the creatures they control, rounded up. +2, target opponent discards half the cards in their hand, rounded up. And for +2, target opponent loses half their life, rounded up. Jeez, it's 8 mana to do the whole thing, but you very likely won't do the whole thing. However, I am kind of mad that Pox apparently costs 8 mana now. I remember when Pox cost 3 mana, but still, this is just kind of okay. They're always going to keep their best creatures. They're always going to keep their best cards, and they're always going to keep their best life. Either way, it's never going to kill them, you know. So I do like this last mode on it, to be honest. I think there's fun setups with it, but either way, I wish I was more impressed by this card. Matter of fact, why does that first mode cost any extra mana at all? Early in the game, I could just kill all of my opponent's creatures with a Path of Peril or Temporary Lockdown or Brotherhood's End. But instead, I only get to kill half of my opponent's 4 creatures. They're going to keep the best ones again. The more I read this card, the more I'm like, no. So let's move on. So let's take a look at some legends, try to cleanse the old palate there, partner. Here's Calamity, Galloping Inferno, and Karavik, the Punisher. Now, Calamity actually looks kind of sick. This is 6 mana for a 4/6 haste. And whenever it attacks while saddled, choose target non-legendary creature that's saddled it this turn and create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of it. Sacrifice that token at the beginning of the next end step. Repeat this process once, and it saddles for 1. So even if you only saddle it with a 1 power guy, you still get 2 token copies of that thing until end of turn that are tapped and attacking. That's actually kind of great, especially considering this has haste, can come down, surprise, show me the meaning of haste, you horse. So really, really excellent card in some ways. It costs an awful lot of mana, and it requires some creatures to already be on the table to benefit it, but there's a bunch of creatures in Standard that I imagine would be really fun to copy twice, even the one time. It could be absolutely backbreaking depending on their end of the battlefield triggers. So really like this, even if all you're copying is like a Spirited Companion and draw 2, like I'm kind of happy about that. Again, I have to fully acknowledge that 6 mana is too much for a Magic card. I think that's a thing you just have to say if you're in the business of doing spoilers, because otherwise everyone will call you dumb, you know, but it is 6 mana and there's probably better stuff you could do in Standard, but like, I really don't care. I just want to copy something ridiculous twice. They did not have to repeat this process once on this card in an age of cards that only allow you to do the thing once per turn. This repeats the process once. You understand the power at your fingertips. It has haste. I'm telling you, this card's better than it looks. Well, let's look at Karavik, the Punisher next. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 black for a 3/3 legendary human warlock. Whenever you commit a crime, exile up to 1 target black card from your graveyard and copy it. You may cast the copy. If you do, you lose 2 life. What a sick Magic card this is. It's actually really nice. First of all, it's basically going to lead to a lot of like 2-for-1s because you'll commit a crime by go for the throating your opponent's creature. And then you can go for the throat your opponent's creature out of your graveyard or one of your other removal spells out of your graveyard, right? You can also just duress them and then just cast Cut Down on their guy because it's in your graveyard. Like all this costs you 2 life a pop, but I still think it's worth it like most of the time if you have the extra mana laying around. Also cute that it's just any black card. You know, it doesn't have to be the duresses or the cut downs or the go for the throats or any of those things. It can just be Shieldred. It can be a graveyard trespasser. It can be a big Shieldred for 5 mana. It could even be a boat. It could be a Virtue of Persistence. It could be a Breach the Multiverse. If you have the mana, it's just really the sky's the limit on this thing. And I'm not sure that it's better than a lot of other black 3-drops right now, Gix in specific, but I do think that with the, 15, 16 black cards in most mono black decks that commit a crime, and that's probably a conservative estimate, this could probably do a good bit of work over a course of a game of Magic. It doesn't matter if it costs you 4-6 life to do that. You got Shieldred and you're drawing cards. So I'm telling you, this is another one that looks, to some players at least, not super impressive, but I do think this could do a lot of work. More legends, huh? Sure. Let's look at Laughing Jasper Flint, Ariette the Beguiler, and Stoic Sphinx. That's not a legend, but Laughing Jasper Flint is a legend. He's 3 mana, 1 a black and a red for a 4/3 legendary lizard rogue. Creatures you control but do not own are mercenaries in addition to their other types. I like where this is going. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top X cards of target opponent's library, where X is the number of outlaws you control. Until end of turn, you may cast spells from among those cards, and mana of any type can be spent to cast those spells. Let's go. I love how much stealing the opponent's stuff we've been doing lately. We just got Outrageous Robbery in the last set. Now we get this. It's Siphon Insight forever ago. Like, things are looking up if you like playing your opponent's deck for them. And I kind of do sometimes, but this is one of the better outlaw payoffs that we've had in a while. I know that you have to wait to untap with this guy in play. And that's not always going to happen. Your opponent might just blow him away, whatever. But in the meantime, he's got a pretty respectable stat line for 3 mana. And if you do untap with him, then suddenly you might just draw like 2-3 cards on curve. Later on in the game, if you drop this guy with a decent sized board and untap with him in play, you could draw like 5 cards off your opponent's library. So just could put you way ahead, especially in a situation where you're already a little bit ahead without actually being win more. Like, I'm a little bit ahead. I got 3 outlaws on the table. I'll drop this guy on tap with him. I basically draw 4 cards. If you weren't already way ahead, that's going to do so for you. So I don't know, man. I like this dude. I might retract the best outlaws payoff so far. I think that's still probably goes to the Bastion of Remembrance, or maybe the little guy, the little Rakdos Goblin guy. I forgot his name, but he's wearing a cowboy hat. That doesn't really narrow it down in this set, but yeah, little guy, he's on screen right now. It's a good guy, but still, I think this is one of the better outlaw payoffs that we've seen so far. Card advantage, yes. Let's take a look at Ariette the Beguiler next. This is 4 mana this time, 1 a white, a black, and a blue. They just threw Esper colors onto my lady. This is 4 mana for a 4/4 legendary human warlock with lifelink. Whenever an aura you control becomes attached to a non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value less than or equal to the aura's mana value, gain control of that permanent for as long as the aura is attached to it. Hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. Now, there's going to have to be ways to play like expensive auras in your deck and stick them to your opponent's creatures without it being the worst thing you ever did in your life to make that decision. So there's going to be a lot of like pretty creative deck building with this card. And I like that, just like the other Ariette that we saw. I really like that card. Fun commander card. But this will also be a relatively fun commander card, but I'm going to try to get it working in standard. At the very least, you got a 4 mana 4/4 lifelink, and I really think you could do a lot worse than that, like stats wise. But if you're only ever able to grab like 1 creature with this, you still did okay, right, kid? You got 4 mana 4/4 lifelink and one of your opponent's dudes. You're doing fine in life. Also note, I've been saying creature this whole time. It can also just grab anything. A non-land permanent an opponent controls. So you can steal artifacts and enchantments, and that's just kind of gross. Like, expect this card to perhaps be slightly better than it looks at first glance. But Stoic Sphinx over here, this is probably the best card on screen right now. It's 4 mana, 2 and 2 blue for a 5/3 Sphinx with flash and flying. And it also has hexproof as long as you have not cast a spell this turn. Amazing. It's pretty great. Flash flying hexproof dude that has 5 power and is reasonably cheap to play for that matter is kind of silly. It just kind of is silly. I think that this is not going to have hexproof as often as you want it to, because there's going to be a way that your opponent more or less forces you to cast a spell on your turn. It happens all the time when you're playing control. You can stay stoic if you want to. You don't have to cast the spells, but there's going to be times where you have to make the decision, like, should I interact with what my opponent's trying to do right now on my turn, or should I just make sure the Sphinx keeps hexproof? And sometimes that's going to be a harder decision than it seems, but just a 4 mana 5 power flash flyer is almost there by itself. Once you slap hexproof into the brew, things start getting very interesting. And if you play this at the end of your opponent's turn, hopefully when they're tapped out, and you immediately get to untap with it, there's going to be a lot of situations where your opponent just can't do anything about that for the rest of the game. It also gives the blue-white control decks that are floating around in standard right now, like an actual clock that's cheap. Like Wandering Emperor costs 4 mana, and you could call it a win condition, but it's basically like a 9-turn clock. That's not really a clock. This is a 4-turn clock starting super early in the game. And I imagine some control players are going to be kind of excited about that. But we got to keep moving here, so let's look at Claim Jumper and One Last Job next. Now, Claim Jumper is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 3/3 rabbit mercenary with vigilance. It's got awesome art too, by the way. Super buff Bugs Bunny. When Claim Jumper enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you may search your library for a Plains card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Then, if an opponent controls more lands than you, still, repeat this process once. If you search your library this way, shuffle. My goodness. So many amazing things about this card, dude. And I've seen some people not impressed by it at first read, but then they get reminded that this doesn't say basic planes anywhere on it. It doesn't say that. It just says planes card. This can go and get duels for you in standard if you wanted to. I'm pretty sure that those surveil lands have a basic land type. So, well, not a basic land type. You know what I mean? Forest, island, swamp, plains, blah, blah, blah. So you go get like the green-white one and surveil, and then potentially do that again. This guy goes and gets dual lands for it. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. And sometimes he'll even do it twice, depending on how far down you are on the count. He's not going to take a wrong turn at Albuquerque, you know. He's going to find the right lands for you every time, get you caught back up. So this dude's sweet. If you are mana screwed, you have to get to at least 3 mana to catch back up, but he catches you back up immediately. He's got a solid little body. He's wandering Emperor proof with the vigilance. You get to make rabbit jokes. Like, what's not to like about this dude? But let's look at one last job, and then I'm out. This is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a sorcery with Spree. For an extra 2 mana, you return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. I'm sold. For an extra 1 mana, return target mount or vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And for another extra 1 mana, you can return an aura or equipment card from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to a creature that you control. So that is 5, 6, 7 mana altogether to do all of that. And that's actually not that bad when you think about it. This is the card from Morrow's Teaser, I believe, that can return up to 3 different permanent types from your graveyard to play. And as a matter of fact, there's 4 different permanent types available to return on the card, so it shouldn't even be that hard to find multiple things to return with it. If you're gonna pay 7 mana for an effect like this in standard, you probably just play like Brilliant Restoration or something, but this is still sweet just because of the modality, right? A 5 mana reanimator spell in white that hits a creature, by the way. That is harder than you think to get. Like Invoke Justice is just about the only one we have in standard, despite the fact there are multiple white reanimation spells in standard. This one can finally hit a creature for not a million white mana specifically, and that might be important, but it can also hit vehicles and stuff, and that's probably kind of important to, maybe could be. So I don't know, man. Just being able to, for 6 mana, sometimes get 2 things for your 1 card. Also a great mode. So I'm not sure if I expect great things from this or anything, but you know I'm always going to be into reanimator spells. Reanimator. Rian Tomato. I'm always into reanimator spells, especially when they do extra stuff. Case in point, Rakdos Joins Up. This is 5 mana, 3, a black and a red for a legendary enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever a legendary creature you control dies, Rakdos Joins Up deals damage equal to that creature's power to target opponent. So let's go, Zayatora. I've made no secret about the fact that I really love Zayatora, and this obviously goes super well in those decks. I have been using push-pull, probably still use it, but I'll be using this thing too. That's kind of ridiculous that this card exists. If we're talking about 5 mana reanimator spells with upside, I'd say the best one in standard is probably still the Cruelty of Gix, like even after we get this one, but this one, super tempting. And honestly, I think this one sets up a lot more like OTKs, like 1-turn kills, than any other reanimator spell in all of standard. So just an absolutely gross card. I wish I had more to say about it, but you guys probably knew how I felt about it the moment you saw it, and I'm not surprising anybody by kind of like dorking out over it a little bit, right? I love these last couple of reanimator spells. We're going to try to get something cooking in the kitchen with both of these, but I do think that this one in particular, the Rakdos one right here, is probably like it has a chance at being the actual best reanimator spell in all of standard if you can get something going with that sort of fling-ish mode, and it shouldn't be too hard, especially considering your opponent's kind of incentivized to kill the giant haste monster you just got out of your graveyard, and if they do that, they might be in a little bit of trouble. So actually disgusting card. And again, I think that this probably sets up 20 or more new 1-turn kills in standard just for the fact that it exists. Oh, one more thing actually before I get off this card. I've been kind of talking about it as though it only cares when the creature you reanimated dies. It's just any legendary guy. That's crazy. Like, just in a legendary mid-range deck that happens to play black and red, you could get away with playing this card towards the top end, and then suddenly not only do you get some value out of it in the form of reanimation and it makes your dude bigger and all that, but also like as long as it's on the table, your opponent can't kill your guys. They have to exile your dudes or they just die. So, you know, there's also that. This card brings you far more value than just like when the guy you reanimated dies. It's whenever like more or less any of your guys die. They kill your Shieldred. You didn't reanimate that. They kill your Shelly. Sure. Cool. Take a bunch of damage for that. So actually disgusting card again. Now, honestly, I don't know how this little guy got all the way up here with all these amazing cards I'm super excited about, but I am pretty excited about him, so that might explain it. This is Caustic Bronco right here. 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 2/2 snake horse mount. Look at him. He saddles for 3, and whenever he attacks, reveal the top card of your library and put it into your hand. You lose life equal to that card's mana value if Bronco isn't saddled. Otherwise, each opponent loses that much life. So it's a Dark Confidant. This is a Bob. This is a Bob right here. It has to attack to actually get you the card. But that's still kind of, I don't care. He's really interesting. And if you can actually saddle him with a big enough guy, then suddenly your opponent might lose 7 life when you rip up that Breach the Multiverse. But, you know, be careful because that could happen to you too. But I guess, you know, in that case, you drew a Breach the Multiverse. How sad can you be? But, well, maybe you're at 6, so that wouldn't be good. But still, I like any like callback to Dark Confidant. And even though this is one that has to attack and has not a great stat line, he's at the very least going to replace himself 9 times out of 10 unless the opponent burns a removal spell on him before he can actually attack. In which case, not going to call it win-win, but hey, you know, if you're playing a 2-mana 2/2 and your opponent felt like they needed to go for the throated, I think you're doing okay. I honestly don't think this guy ends up doing too much. He's the black 2-drop trap of the set. We've seen a few of these in a few sets recently, right? Slaughter Specialist, Ayara's Oathsworn, Graph Reaver. I could go on. There's been a lot of Blade of the Oni. There's a lot of disappointing black 2-drops that look really cool when you first see them. And I think this is probably the next in a long line. But again, Dark Confidant reference. You got me. So let's move on to a black card that I think is going to be a little bit better. This is Pitiless Carnage. 4 mana, 3 and a black for a sorcery. Sacrifice any number of permanents you control. Draw that many cards. You can plot this for 1 and 2 black. I have seen some people crapping on this card today. This card's nuts. This card's so good. Like, I don't know if it's going to see too much standard play or anything, but like sacrifice 3 permanents, draw 3 cards for free on a later turn in the game is something you're probably going to be okay with doing, especially if those early turns have been filled with like creating clues or blood tokens or treasure tokens or worthless other tokens or getting value by doing this. And so you just got stuff to sacrifice and you don't mind. Even a control deck later on in the game could sack 3 lands and go down to like 6 lands and they'd still be fine. You know what I mean? So like you don't mind like sacking those things to draw the cards. I don't love paying 4 mana at sorcery speed for this, but again, this is one of those that if you plot it, it's much, much better. Not only does it cost less to plot, but once you do get to play it for free, you'll actually have all your mana open to play the cards you just drew, which is like a huge deal, right? So I don't know. If you're looking for the right thing in a game of Magic and you don't have to go so far down on lands that you can't cast the sweeper you're inevitably looking for, then like the card actually looks kind of sweet. It's one of the few like black cards that doesn't make you pay life. Definitely makes you pay a very high cost, but as we've seen in the past, there are plenty of ways to turn that downside into an upside and also collect a ton of cards while you're at it. So I think there's definitely something to this. But final card of the day, barring any reloads here, let's take a look at Oba Splitter of Seconds, who does not, ironically, have Split Second. Just so you know, but she does cost 4 mana, 1 in Grixis colors, a blue, a black, and a red for a 2/5 legendary Ogre Warlock with Menace. Whenever Oba Splitter of Seconds deals combat damage to a player, you get that many additional upkeep steps after this phase. Okay, so to answer the most common question of the day, what is that many? It's the damage that she does. So if she gets through for her base 2 damage, you get 2 extra upkeep steps after your combat step, and then you go back to your second main phase after that. This card is cracked. This card is absolutely cracked, but probably not in standard. Just say that, you know, it's a 4 mana thing that you have to wait a whole turn to get in with, and then it actually has to get in for combat damage. All this is much, much easier said than done in a format like standard or any competitive environment, but I still think it's worth it to at least take a look at. Now, in EDH, I've already seen some pretty ridiculous things. You could do like Braid of Fire, which cumulative upkeep, add a red, so you just get all the mana in the world. That's kind of funny. Or maybe the best thing I've seen with it, props to whoever said this on Reddit, mechanized production. You just get a bunch of upkeep steps after your combat step, right? And then you make a bunch of dudes and you just win the game with the mechanized production, like on that same turn that you dealt the combat damage with Obika. So that's hilarious. But I am the standard Mandard, so I figured probably bring some stuff you could do in standard with this. So first of all, there's obviously, I should go ahead and get this out of the way. I like reanimation. Hello, I'm Deb. I like reanimation and aristocrats. So in case you didn't know that about me, you probably didn't realize that the first thing I was destined to point out for this card is Virtue of Persistence and Portal to Phyrexia, both cards that work pretty freaking well with it if you have enough creatures in your yard, or their yard for that matter. But the best ones are probably Undergrowth Recon, even though it is kind of silly and it's not in the same colors as Obika. Like, it's still a bunch of lands. It's so many lands, like immediately if you have lands in your yard, so it's pretty powerful. But probably the most like straightforwardly powerful one that's at least in her color combination is Bold Horde Dracosaur. Imagine that. Imagine getting like, I don't know, 6 cards you can cast, or like 2 or 3 little 3/1 guys or whatever. You know, all that seems good. I think that Bone Horde Dracosaur is probably the most obvious disgusting combination with the card in standard. But again, this card isn't really for standard. This is for commander. And if nothing else, I think the most impactful thing about the card is that until the end of time, until Magic is completely done, which won't be for like 400 years from now. This game is like a cockroach. Until Magic is long gone, for now on, every single new set that comes out, like 6 freaking sets a year, right? 4 standard releases, a couple of Universes Beyond, a couple of Commander sets, like 20 sets a year. Every single new card that comes out, we're going to be like, that does a thing on my upkeep. That goes in my Mtg deck. So like, that's, at least you had to give the card that, you know, like from now on, if anything at all does anything on your upkeep, this is going to matter for this. So that's actually a pretty important thing, if nothing else. But I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot more else, because this card's going to see playing Commander basically till the end of time. There's too much ridiculous garbage you can do with it. But I just reloaded Mythic Spoiler and MTG Previews, trying to be thorough. Turns out we did it. We actually made it through every single card of the day, as we have these last 3 or 4 days together. Appreciate you guys being around for spoiler season, but there's a little bit more left. It looks like we only have about 50 or 60 more cards from this set to actually reveal. So they're probably going to take the weekend off, and then Monday, Tuesday, we'll likely finish off spoiler season. So stick with the channel, and again, over the weekend, I'll be putting out some content about things, probably at least that coffee break about all the good Outlaws and standards. So again, if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and sub to the channel. Last I checked, we needed literally like 20 to get to the next like 1,000 subscribers, right? So do that if you haven't done it yet, and you might be the 133,000 sub or whatever it is. But anyway, aside from that, just do all the YouTube stuff on your way out. Hit the likes before you hit the lights. Hit the sub before you hit the mub. Hit the share before you hit the hair. Do all those things. Check out the Patreon as well before you do the Hatreon. I guess that kind of works. But either way, join up if you want to. $1 a month. You can vote on what decks we do once this season starts. But aside from that, I'm Dunzo for this onezo, and that is Itsky Lowitsky. So I will catch you cats later. I am Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.